All right, so we're diving into some pretty fascinating explosive history this time around.
Oh, yeah.
You sent over Contributions to the History of Explosive Agents, second memoir by F.A. Abel from 1873.
It's a classic.
But I gotta say, even though it's from way back then,
Yeah.
the research is still surprisingly relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Fundamentals never really change,
I guess so.
Yeah.
I mean, who's at least a little bit intrigued by the science behind things that go boom?
Well, especially when you realize that, what Abel was doing back then was totally groundbreaking.
Oh, yeah.
He was tackling these huge fundamental questions about what actually makes a substance detonate.
Right.
And how that detonation travels from, one place to the next.
Right.
It seems obvious to us now, but back then it was a total mystery.
So it's kind of like he was writing the rule book on explosions back then.
Yeah, exactly. He was figuring out the rules of the game.
So where do we even begin with something like this? A 150-year-old research paper on explosives.
Well, one of the things that really fascinated Abel was this idea of the conditions needed for detonations.
Okay.
Like, he was trying to figure out why some substances would explode with a huge bang and others would just kind of fizzle out.
Right.
And it wasn't just a theoretical thing for him either.
Right.
He was looking at the practical implications, too, for things like mining and engineering, where explosives were, super important.
Yeah, I mean, back then, explosives were absolutely essential for those industries.
Right.
But they were also notoriously dangerous.
Oh, totally.
So figuring out how to control them must have been a really big deal.
Huge, yeah. It was a matter of life and death a lot of the time.
Right.
And one of the things that really, kind of blew Abel's mind was how picky some explosives could be about what triggered them.
What do you mean?
Well, like, you could have one explosive that would detonate perfectly fine when you triggered it with a certain type of explosive.
Okay.
But then you'd try to trigger it with something else that seemed, equally powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And it would just completely ignore it.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about, like, the raw power then?
Yeah. No, there's definitely something else going on there. It's
Okay.
like, think of it like tuning forks. Okay, you strike one tuning fork and it'll make another one nearby start to vibrate.
Right.
But only if they're tuned to the same frequency.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Abel thought something similar might be happening with explosives.
So you're saying that it's all about how the energy waves interact.
Yeah.
It's like the trigger explosion has to be speaking the right language for the main charge to understand it.
Exactly, you got
Okay,
it. He called it the synchronicity of vibrations.
Okay.
And it still has big implications for how we design and use explosives even today.
That's amazing. It's like there's this whole hidden world of energy waves that we can't see,
Right.
but they're dictating how these powerful reactions unfold.
Yeah, and that's why those early researchers were so meticulous in their experiments.
They had to be,
They had to figure out all those little details.
so they could understand what was really going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, speaking of meticulous, Abel also noticed something else kind of interesting about how these explosions travel.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, he found that even the material of the tube containing the explosive
Okay.
could influence how that detonation was transmitted.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
I never would have thought about that.
You'd think the container would just be along for the ride.
Right, just an innocent bystander.
But it actually wasn't.
So what was it about the material that made such a difference?
Well, it wasn't just the material itself.
Okay.
It was the texture of that inner surface.
Right.
So like a rough surface would create more friction,
Mm-hmm.
and that would affect the gas wave that was generated by the explosion.
Oh, I see. It's like the difference between sliding down a smooth slide
Yeah.
versus a bumpy one.
Exactly.
You're going to go a lot faster on the smooth one.
So even these tiny little details
Right.
could make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's all about controlling that chain reaction.
Wow, it seems like controlling an explosion is like a delicate balancing act then.
It really is.
You have to get everything just right.
And to think Abel was already figuring this out back in the 1870s,
Amazing.
way ahead of his time.
Now, here's another thing that I found fascinating.
Okay.
Abel discovered that diluting liquid explosives,
Yeah.
like nitroglycerin,
Mm-hmm.
with inert solids,
Mm-hmm.
didn't actually change their sensitivity to detonation.
That's interesting. So it's not as simple as just adding something to make it less explosive.
Right. It seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, you'd think that would make it safer,
Right.
but it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
But this discovery actually ended up paving the way for the invention of dynamite.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, by mixing nitroglycerin with an absorbent material, you can actually create a much safer and more stable explosive.
So instead of trying to weaken the explosive itself, they found a way to control it
Right.
by changing its physical form.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how understanding those little subtleties of detonation can lead to some really groundbreaking innovations.
That's brilliant. I mean, I'm already hooked.
Well, good.
What else did Abel uncover in his research?
Oh, we're just getting started.
I can't wait to hear more.
There's a lot more to come. You know, it's amazing how Abel could connect these seemingly tiny little details to the bigger picture of how detonations work.
Right.
Like, he realized that even things like the diameter of the explosive charge and the size of the tube it's in could drastically change how powerful the explosion was.
So it's not just about the explosive itself, then?
No, not at all.
It's also about the environment it's in.
Right.
Like a small fire in a fireplace is fine.
Exact.
But that same fire could be devastating out in a dry forest.
Perfect analogy.
It's all about containment, right?
Yeah, and Abel even looked at how the strength of the container itself played a role in how the explosion unfolded.
Interesting.
Like if the container was too weak, it might rupture before the full force of the detonation could be transmitted.
So you'd get like a weaker blast.
Exactly. Much less effective.
It's like you're trying to control that chain reaction.
Right.
Making sure that the energy goes where you want it to go.
Abel was already thinking about all this back in the 1870s.
Wow, that's incredible.
Way ahead of his time.
Now, didn't you mention something earlier about diluting an explosive with inert materials?
Yeah.
And how that doesn't always make it safer.
Right. Remember with liquid nitroglycerin? Even if you dilute it, the detonator can still make direct contact.
And set it off.
Exactly. But with solid explosives, it's a little different.
Okay.
If you break up that solid explosive with something inert, like you're putting up roadblocks for the explosion.
Makes it harder for the detonation to spread.
Exactly. It's like creating speed bumps for that explosion.
I like that analogy.
Abel was one of the first to really understand this distinction, that the physical state of the explosive really matters.
Right? Between a liquid and a solid.
Huge difference in how they behave.
So the takeaway is, you can't just assume that adding something to an explosive will make it safer.
Right.
You have to really understand the chemistry and the physics behind it.
And that's what made Abel so special. He wasn't just making things go boom.
He was trying to understand why.
Exactly. He was carefully investigating the why behind each result.
So his work is like a masterclass in scientific observation, though.
Absolutely. And experimentation.
Okay. So we've talked about how the container and the form of the explosive can influence the blast.
Right.
But what about the explosive itself?
Okay.
Were there any other kind of interesting properties of explosives that Abel discovered?
Well, one of the most fascinating areas of his research involved gun cotton.
Okay.
He found that how much you compressed the gun cotton had a huge impact on how easily it would detonate.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, the more compressed something is, the more tightly packed those molecules are.
Right, so it would react more violently.
And get this, he even experimented with freezing wet compressed gun cotton.
What?
And discovered it became even more sensitive to detonation.
Wow. So you had this frozen explosive that was even more likely to go off.
It's pretty wild. Imagine the safety precautions they must have had to take back then.
Yeah, talk about a chilling thought.
But these findings weren't just theoretical for Abel.
Right.
He was also interested in the practical applications.
Yeah.
And one of the most incredible applications he discovered was using water.
What?
To transmit detonations for bursting cast iron shells.
Wait, water?
Yeah.
Isn't water supposed to, like, put out fires?
I know it seems counterintuitive.
Not make explosions bigger.
But water's resistance actually helps to focus the force of the explosion.
Oh, wow.
Making it much more powerful and efficient.
So instead of trying to stop the explosion, you're actually using the water to direct it.
Precisely. It's like using a magnifying glass to focus sunlight, but with explosive energy.
That's brilliant.
It's a great example of how understanding the physics of detonation can lead to some really unexpected and innovative solutions.
So this Abel guy was really good at finding those unexpected connections then.
He was a master at it.
And pushing the boundaries of what was possible.
Absolutely.
I'm starting to see why his research is still so relevant today.
It's not just about blowing things up.
It's about understanding those fundamental forces at play.
Right.
And how we can harness them.
For all sorts of applications.
Now, besides all of these incredible scientific contributions, what else stands out to you about Abel's legacy?
Well, one thing that really impresses me is his dedication to meticulous research.
Okay.
He really understood the importance of documenting every detail, no matter how small.
Yeah.
And that's something that continues to inspire scientists and engineers even today.
So the next time we see a controlled demolition or fireworks lighting up the sky, we should all take a moment to remember F.A. Abel. The guy who dedicated his life to figuring out how to make things go boom.
Safely and effectively.
Exactly.
But his work also raises some important questions.
Oh, like what?
Well, Abel was really focused on understanding how to initiate and control explosions.
Right.
But what about the opposite?
Okay.
How do we prevent them?
That's a good point.
How can we apply his insights to develop even safer handling and storage techniques?
Right.
To minimize the risks associated with these powerful substances?
That's a question that's more relevant than ever.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially in today's world.
Yeah.
Where explosives play such a complex role.
In everything.
Yeah, from mining and construction to, unfortunately, warfare and terrorism.
It's a double-edged sword.
It really is.
It's about recognizing the power of these substances and respecting the science behind them.
Well said. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah, we have.
But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of Abel's work.
Oh, there's so much more to explore.
What other fascinating insights did he uncover in his exploration of the world of explosives? It's really interesting how much of Abel's work seemed to focus on gun cotton.
Yeah, he was definitely fascinated by it.
Like, remember when we were talking about how the degree of compression affects its sensitivity?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Abel actually took that research even further.
Oh, wow. How so?
He meticulously compared the behavior of dry compressed gun cotton to wet compressed gun cotton.
Interesting. So he was looking at the effects of moisture.
Exactly. And he found a pretty significant difference.
Yeah, what was that?
Well, he discovered that the wet version was way less sensitive to detonation.
Huh. Even when using a powerful initiator.
Yeah, even with something like fulminate of mercury.
So the water was basically acting as a buffer.
Right. It made the gun cotton much less likely to explode accidentally.
That's really important because it highlights how the sensitivity of an explosive isn't just about its chemical makeup.
Right. There are factors involved.
Things like moisture content, physical form, even the surrounding environment.
Can all play a role?
It's a good reminder that explosives are complex.
They're not simple things.
And understanding these nuances is key to handling them safely.
Okay, so speaking of handling them safely,
yeah,
let's go back to that incredible discovery about using water to transmit detonations.
Oh, yeah, the one for bursting cast iron shells.
Oh, right. It still blows my mind a little bit.
I know, it's kind of mind-bending.
You'd think that water would dampen an explosion.
Right.
But Abel actually realized that its resistance could be used to our advantage.
It focuses the force.
Yeah, creating a much more powerful and concentrated blast.
It's like those martial arts masters
who
use their opponent's force against them.
You're not trying to stop the explosion.
Right.
You're using the water to direct it.
Exactly. And it led to some really clever shell designs, too.
Oh, yeah.
Simpler, yet more effective.
That's really amazing.
It's a perfect example of how Abel could combine scientific understanding with practical applications.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Abel's world here, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the main thing is that Abel's work laid the foundation for how we understand and use explosives today.
Right. And even though his research is over 150 years old, those principles he uncovered are still relevant.
Oh, absolutely.
Like in developing safer explosives.
Oh, right.
And in the innovative ways we use them today.
For everything from mining and construction to space exploration.
It's pretty incredible to think about.
It is.
How this one scientist working over a century ago had such a profound impact on our world.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that scientific progress builds upon the work of those who came before us.
Right. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants.
Exactly.
And in this case, those giants were figuring out how to make things go boom.
All in the name of science.
Well, this has been a fascinating journey.
It has.
Thanks for guiding us through this explosive deep dive.
My pleasure. It's been a blast talking about this with you.